愿大家平安。
Peace to you all.
今天晚上我们来谈谈爱心的操练。
The topic we will be talking about tonight is training in love.
请看提摩太前书第4章第7节。
Let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7.
提摩太前书4章第7节。
1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7.
只是要弃绝世俗的言语和老妇荒谬的话，在敬虔上操练自己。
Have nothing to do with godly myths and old wives' tales, rather train yourself to be godly.
每一个神的工人、神的儿女都要在敬虔上操练自己。
And every son and daughter and worker of God have to train themselves on godliness.
我们在哪几方面操练自己？
In what ways should we train ourselves
讲
up?
过了，我们要在祷告上操练自己。
We have talked about how we have to train ourselves in
我
prayer
们也讲过了，要在言语上操练自己。
and in our speech.
那我们今天来讲，我们要在爱心上操练自己。
Tonight we will be talking about how we train ourselves in love.
有人说，爱心还是要操练的吗？
Some people may ask, you have to train yourself in love?
没有错，爱心是需要操练的，
It's true that it needs practice
因为人天生是自私的，
because naturally humankind are selfish.
因为罪进入世界之后，
Because after sin entered the world,
人性其实都是罪性，
human nature is sinful nature.
所以人呢是天生就是有自私的反应。
Therefore, naturally, humankind have selfishness.
你看小孩子的行为就知道，
It's clear when you look at the actions of a
会
child.
讲话了都是我要，或者我不要。
As soon as a child learns to talk, it's about I want or I don't want.
小朋友在一起也会吵架，也会争玩具，
And even among toddlers, children will fight for toys.
除非有人教他，不然的话他就变成一个自私的人。
Unless you teach them, they will not learn to share.
很多父母错以为说给孩子更多的爱，他就会变成一个有爱心的人。
Some parents, they feel like I will give my child abundant love and they will become good people.
其实这是错误的想法。
This is not completely right.
你给你孩子很多的爱，他不会成为一个有爱心的人。
If you only give your child abundant love, they will not necessarily become good people.
有时候你给他过度的爱、溺爱，反而让他成为一个自私的人。
Because sometimes you will give them too much love, you spoil them, you will cultivate selfishness.
现在人孩子生的少，
Now people have less and less children.
每一个孩子都得到很多的爱，
So most children have more love.
但是长大了，很多很自私的，
But often as they grow up, they will become selfish.
因为父母没有给孩子爱心的操练。
This increased tendency comes from that parents did not give them training in love.
那为什么我们操练虔诚是要操练爱心呢？
So why is it that to cultivate godliness, we have to train in
我
love?
们看雅各书1章27节，
Let's go to James chapter 1, verse 27.
雅各书1章27节，
James chapter 1, verse 27.
在神我们的父面前，那清洁没有玷污的、玷污的虔诚，就是看顾在患难中的孤儿寡妇，并且保守自己，不占世俗。
Verse 27, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world.
这里讲得很清楚了，什么时候真正的虔诚呢？
Here it describes true godliness.
不是你穿得很整齐去教会就是真正虔诚，
It's not that you simply dress nicely and go to
也
church.
不是你每天读几十篇圣经，或者是祷告几个钟头你就很虔诚。
Nor is it that you just pray hours or read chapter after chapter of the scripture.
那些是需要的，
These are necessary, yes.
但是最重要的是什么？
But what is the most important thing?
你要有爱心呢，
That you have love.
你要看顾在患难中的孤儿寡妇。
That you look after the orphans and widows in their distress.
如果你圣经很懂，但是没爱心，在神面前你不虔诚。
If you understand the Bible thoroughly yet have no action before God, then your faith is dead.
你圣工作很多，但是你对别人很冷淡，
You do a lot of holy work, yet you are cold toward others.
那你也是不虔诚。
Then you are not godly.
所以其实操练虔诚就是要操练爱心。
So this is to say that to cultivate godliness, you must train in love.
有人说我有爱心啊，我爱我丈夫，爱我太太，爱我孩子。
And some people say, but I do have love. I love my spouse. I love my children.
爱你自己所亲的人，那个不是真正的爱心。
Loving your family, this is not true love.
当然也是爱，但是这个很自然的，不用操练的。
Well, it is love, but it comes naturally, so it doesn't really need
那
training.
你生呢，你选呢，你当然会爱他。
Because your spouse was by your choice and you birthed your children, so of course you will love
或者
them.
对你来说有好处的合乎你的条件的，你当然会爱他。
Or perhaps toward relationships that benefit you or suit your taste, of course it's natural to
这种
love.
自然就有的爱，不
This
需
is,
要操练。
this is naturally occurring love and it needs no training.
但是很可惜今天很多人连这种自然应该有的爱都做不到。
Unfortunately, even today, even these kinds of natural love, people have a hard time keeping.
自己的配偶都不爱，你怎么爱别人？
Some people may have a hard time even loving their spouse. How can they love
自己
others?
父母都不爱，你怎么说就爱别人？
How can they and they don't even love their parents? How can they love
这
others?
最基本的，你对你的亲人、家人那个要爱。
This fundamental love toward family they even lack.
但是这里所说的操练是爱那些其实跟你自己没有什么关联的人。
Now, what it says here that cultivating love toward these people, they have nothing to do with you.
别人的父母死了，他是孤儿，
The parents of somebody else died. That person is now an orphan.
你看到他这样，你有什么感觉？你会做什么？
When you look toward this person, newly orphaned, what will you think? What will you do?
别人老公死了，他家里没饭吃了，缴不起租金了。
Someone's husband died. Now they are short a source of income and they are short on rent.
你说我很忙我要去聚会，对不起，我没空理你。
And will you say, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I have to go to service now. Goodbye.
这个就是没爱心。
These are examples of lacking in love.
这里是用孤儿寡妇做一个最极端的例子。
And of course, here we use the most extreme examples of orphans and widows as
你要
an example.
练成那个跟你没有关联的人，跟你没有亲戚关系的人，或者是不可爱的人，你都去爱。
We strive to be able to love those who are difficult to love and those who have nothing to do with you.
这个才是真正的爱心。
This is true love.
所以我们都要操练。
So we all need some training.
那现在是一个危险的日子。
These days, it's a dangerous time.
我们看提摩太后书3章1到5节。
Let's go to 2 Timothy chapter 3.
提摩太后书第3章1到5节。
2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 1 to 5.
这里说，你该知道末世必有危险的日子来到。
Here it says, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days.
什么叫危险的日子？
What does it mean, terrible times
有
or
人说
dangerous
是不是
times?
快打仗啊？
Some people say war could be upon us.
有人说是不是外面有很多病毒，所以很危险呢？
And others will ask, is it because there's a lot of viruses and germs out there?
那个不是真正的危险，
And these are not true danger.
物质的危险不是真正的危险，
Materialistic danger are not true risk.
因为顶多也就失去肉体的生命，
Because the worst that will happen is that you lose your fleshly life,
但是你还有永恒的生命。
but you still have your eternal life.
但是末世的危险是在乎于说，你有可能会失去你的灵命。
The terrible times, the danger in the last days is the risk that you will lose your spiritual life.
那为什么信主的人会失去灵命？
Now, why would even believers lose their spiritual life?
因为会被外面的人影响。
Because they will be influenced by outsiders.
从第2节到第5节、第
Starting-
4节，
Starting from verses 2 to 4,
就形容这个世界为什么那么危险。
it describes the true dangers of this world.
最主要用一个字来形容，就是末世的人是很自私。
You can use one word to describe the situation is that the people of the last days are very selfish.
当然这里讲了很多，
Of course, here it describes many
但
traits.
是用一个字就是自私，
But you can summarize this with one word, and that is selfishness.
只顾自己，
They only care about themselves.
不顾任何人，也不顾神。
They do not care about God nor other people.
这个所谓的自我中心的年代，
This is what we call an egocentric time.
所以这个有时候会影响到主内的弟兄姐妹。
And sometimes this can influence the brothers and sisters within the Lord as well.
自己顾自己就好了。
All I have to do is care about myself.
但是其实如果不知不觉我们不小心的话，
But if we are not careful,
我们有可能变成一种人，
gradually we may become this kind of
我们
person.
把它形容成为冷漠的虔诚人。
And we can describe these people as cold, godly people,
In different godly person。
indifferent godly people.
我们看路加福音10章30到32节。
Let's go to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10, verses 30 to 32.
路加福音10章30节，
Luke, chapter 10, verse 30.
耶稣回答说：“有一个人从耶路撒冷下耶利哥去，落在强盗手中，他们剥了他们的衣裳，把他打个半死，就丢下他走了。
Verse 30, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. When he fell into the hands of robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead.
主耶稣这里讲了一个故事。
Here, Jesus told a story.
2000年前呢，从耶路撒冷要下到耶利哥这条路还有几十公里。
2,000 years ago, the journey from Jerusalem to Jericho, it's quite a few kilometers.
耶路撒冷是山上，耶利哥是比较低的地方。
Jerusalem it has a higher altitude, and Jericho is lower in the land.
以前没有巴士没有飞机都要走路的。
Back then, there were no trains or buses. People had to walk.
那如果你一个人走路的话，
So if one person is walking,
你身上可能有一些钱、一些货。
you'll probably carry some items and even money with you.
好了，路上有很多强盗。
And there are also robbers along this way.
通常强盗抢完钱之后就直接把那个人打了半死，甚至可能把他打死。
Often after robbers make their theft, they will beat the person up half dead or even fully dead.
这里说这个人呢，被强盗抢完之后还被打了半死。
And it describes this person exactly that he was robbed and then beaten half to death.
连身上最值钱的那件衣服、那件外衣都抢，
All the valuable items, even his clothing, were stripped.
之后把他留在地上，让他自生自灭。
He was left to die.
他又痛，
He was in a lot of pain.
又光着身体，
He was also naked
可能又饿，
and perhaps hungry,
又在流血。
and he was bleeding.
那如果没有人救他的话，
If no one was there to save him,
这个人必死无疑。
this person will surely die.
好了，这31节有一个人来了，
And in verse 31, someone came by.
他是谁呢？
Who is he?
哇，如果那个人看见那个人，他应该很高兴。
And if this injured person saw someone coming by, he must have been excited.
哇，这里说是个祭司来了。
And here we know that it was a priest.
祭司是谁？
Who is a priest?
利未人当中选出来可以献祭侍奉神的人啊。
The chosen among the Levites who were deemed qualified enough to give
亚伦的后
sacrifice.
代啊，
The descendant of Aaron.
可以在圣殿里面侍奉。
Someone who's able to serve in the temple.
还有呢，最会圣经，
Of course, someone who is well versed in the Bible.
平常呢穿着祭司的袍，在神的殿里面进出侍奉神。
Usually, this person will be dressed beautifully, serving in the temple of God, doing his work.
大家都认识，
Everybody would know them.
大家都尊重。
Everyone would respect them.
你看这种人是不是最好的人？
Someone like this, aren't they amazing?
结果这个人来看一看，那就走了。
But this person simply walked past this man, saw him, and kept
还
going.
有特别强调不是从这边走是绕过他走了 ，across the other side， 绕过他上面走。
And here we see that he didn't just walk past the man, he actually went around avoiding the man.
就像现在这个疫情之下，你在外面走路对面有人看到你远远他就绕到马路对面。
This reminds me of the pandemic time where you're walking outside and you see someone else coming your direction and they start going around you, making a big circle.
有时候觉得很奇怪，因为户外不是很安全吗？你也戴口罩，我也戴口罩，怎么看到我好像看到大麻风一样？
Sometimes this feels a little bit strange because we're both outside, we're both wearing a mask, yet you see me and you're avoiding me like the plague.
华人的最怕，绕到对面都是华人多。
And I see a trend among Asian folks.
自己戴口罩还是很怕死。
And even though they're wearing a mask, but they are afraid of the danger of the
那
pandemic.
但是这个是祭司
But keeping in mind this was a priest,
他虔不虔诚？
is he reverent? Is he
在
godly?
人面前他很虔诚。
He is definitely in front of you.
那现在问题是现在没人看见
But the important thing is no one is seeing him now.
他看到这个人躺在那边流血，被人半死赤身裸体。
He saw this person being injured, naked, bleeding in front of him.
他看一看，绕路就绕远一点就走了。
He took a look and he went around the man far away and then went on his way.
有时候在想，为什么他会这样？
Sometimes I think to myself, why did he do that?
有时候我们想，我们可能也会这样。
And to be honest, I think we may do that as
我们
well.
在神面前很虔诚，
Because in front of God, we are godly.
但是有时候对别人的需要我们看不见。
But there's so often that before someone in their need, we pretend we do not see
或者
them.
视而不见。
Or perhaps we pretend that we don't see
我
them.
们会告诉自己，他可能已经死了，救了也没有用。
We might even tell us that they are beyond saving.
或者是我不救他，别人会救他。
Or if I don't save them, someone else will.
神会看顾他的。
God will look after them.
或者是觉得说我圣功那么多，等一下摸到，如果他死掉了，我不是要好几天又不洁净啊？
Or perhaps he thought, I still have a lot of holy work to do. If I accidentally touched him and he's dead, then I will be unclean.
他可能觉得他的圣功比一条人的命还更重要。
And in this case, perhaps the priest saw his holy work more important than a human life.
当然，如果这个是他的儿子躺在那边，他肯定会去救他。
But if this injured person was his son, then he will drop everything to save him.
但是问题是，他觉得现在没有空了。
So the most important thing is that he felt like he didn't have time at that
或者是最主要的，可能是不想惹麻烦。
Or maybe he didn't want to bring trouble upon himself.
有时候我们会不会像这种冷漠的虔诚人？
Sometimes are we like these indifferent godly people?
另外一个又来了，利未人，
There's another person who passed by who was a Levite.
的等次比祭司低一级。
This person was a slightly lower social standard than the priest.
但是你不能要求他，既然祭司都不理了，利未人也不会好太多。
But he also didn't do much better, unfortunately.
为什么？
Why?
所以说特别强调一点啊，
Jesus emphasized one
你
thing.
圣经很懂没有用，
Knowing the Bible, it doesn't do a lot.
教会圣工做很多没有用。
You do a lot of holy work that also doesn't do a lot.
如果你对人很冷漠，
If you are very cold toward
你
others,
根本不是虔诚人，
then you are not godly.
你还比不上那个撒玛利亚人。
Then you are actually less than the Samaritan.
好，接下来第33节，
Reading forward to verse 33.
唯有一个撒玛利亚人行路来到那里，看见他就动了慈心。
There was this one Samaritan man who traveled by this injured person and took pity on him.
撒玛利亚人在犹太人眼中是不洁净的，是不纯种。
In the eyes of the Jewish people, Samaritans, they were outsiders, they were unclean, they were of mixed race.
犹太人最歧视撒玛利亚人，
And there's a lot of discrimination historically from the Jews to the Samaritan
觉得他
people.
们品种不纯，再来呢道理也不纯。
They feel like in terms of both their belief and their cultural background, they were unclean.
根本不是神的选民。
They are not the chosen people of God.
但是主耶稣用这个比喻，
However, Jesus in this parable, he described
这个大家都看不起的撒玛利亚人，结果他是有爱心。
that this Samaritan whom everybody looked down upon, he had love.
这里说啊，他走路到那边看见，有感觉，有感觉。
That he traveled, he came by where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity.
祭司跟利未人看见，但是没感觉。
The priest and the Levite, they walked past him, had no pity.
但是撒玛利亚人看见有感觉，
Yet the sight of the injured man moved this Samaritan.
这个感觉叫 compassion 啊，这叫怜悯的心。
And we call this pity or compassion.
这个怜悯的心其实是神的爱，从神来的，
And compassion is a kind of love that comes from God
不
himself.
是看到她很漂亮哦，我想去靠近她，认识她。
It's not like he saw something beautiful, a nice looking person, and they wanted to approach
而
him.
是觉得她很可怜，我要帮她。
But on the other hand, he saw this person as pitiful and he wanted to help
这
him.
个跟人的本性、人的自私是不一样。
This is very different from the nature of man, the selfishness in
人
mankind.
会被漂亮的有条件好的人吸引过去。
Because naturally we are attracted by what is beautiful, what traits are good to us.
对于那个脏的啦、生病的啦、躺在地上啊，那我们就想远离一点。
But toward the unclean, toward the sick, and toward the undesirable, we often want to stay away from.
但是神不是这样，
But God is not like this.
神看到那个没人要的、流血的、快死的、脏的，神要去过去救。
God looks at the pitiful, the unlovable, the dirty, the sick. He has compassion upon them.
你想想看，我们以前不是这样吗？
And think back, weren't we like this before?
在神眼中，我们就是那个受伤的。
Before God's eyes, we are like the injured.
我们因为犯罪被打伤了，
Because we have sinned, we have been beaten to an injured state.
流血了，
We are bleeding.
我们的衣服被抢走了，
Our clothes have been stripped.
我们犯了罪，赤身露体，好像亚当一样。
And we have sinned and we have been stripped of our clothing or dignity. We are just like Adam.
我们呢，爬不起来，软弱啊。
We are weak and we are unable to get up on our
我
own.
们灵命也快死了，
Our spiritual life is
我
dwindling.
们准备要下地狱。
We are ready to go to hell.
但是主耶稣基督就来救我们这些人。
But Jesus, he came to save us all.
所以神的心一种虔诚，所谓的虔诚就是 godly， 就是像神的意思。
And we see in the English word a godly has the word God in it, is to be like God.
操练虔诚，真的敬虔，就是像神有爱。
To be training in godliness is to be like God, is to have the love of God.
他不管了， 会不会惹麻烦，他也不管，
And the Samaritan man did not think whether he would bring trouble on
也
himself
不会说啊，如果他已经死了，误会我的身体怎么办？
or did he worry about, will this person, if he was dead, would he make my hands unclean?
34节啊，他上前用油和酒来倒在他的伤处。
In verse 34, we see how he went to the injured man and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine.
伤口不洗不清就会发炎，会死的。
We know that if a wound is not treated properly, there will be infection and the person will die from sepsis.
好了，那现在包好了，但是他不能走路啊，放在自己的驴上面。
So the Samaritan wrapped up his wounds, but this person was unable to walk, so he put the man on his own donkey.
他自己就走路了，那让他做牲口。
The Samaritan man was willing to walk himself so that the injured man can ride on his
他
donkey.
带到店里面，
He brought him to an inn
让他休息，好好养病。
for him to have a place to recover and heal.
把钱还要给那个店家说，你好好照顾他，不够钱以后我来还给你。
And more than that, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, leaving instructions to look after him. And anything extra you spent on him, I will reimburse you in the future.
你看，如果你是那个躺在地上的人，
If you were that person lying on the
你
ground,
碰到一个撒玛利亚人，你多感激啊！
you met the Samaritan man, how grateful will you be?
这里没有记载他读很多圣经，
Here it doesn't describe that he was well versed in the
但是他
Bible,
心中一定是相信神，
but in his heart, he definitely believed in God.
不一定是个学者，
He may not be a scholar,
不一定会讲道，
he may not know how to give sermon,
更没有在圣殿侍奉，
but he perhaps have never served in the church.
但是在神眼中，他是真正的虔诚，
But in the eyes of God, he was a truly godly man
因为他爱他的邻舍。
because he loved his neighbor.
谁是他的邻舍？
Who is his neighbor?
那个躺在地上的人，他就把他当邻舍，
The person who was lying on the ground half dead, he treated him as his neighbor.
不管种族，不管背景，不管国籍，
And I don't care what your nationality, your cultural background, your ethnic group is.
只要你有需要，你就是我的邻舍。
If you have a need, you are my neighbor.
这个是需要操练的，
This is something that we need training in
因为我们人实在太自私了。
because humans are too selfish.
有时候我们只会爱属自己的人，
Sometimes we only love the people we know.
或者是对我们自己种族啊、自己国家、自己肤色的人呢比较信任或者比较爱护。
The person you like or people who you consider belonging to you, perhaps your own nationality or people who are the same skin color as
有
you.
时候还会歧视别人。
And on the other hand, we may even discriminate other ethnic groups.
我们华人呢，有时候心中还是蛮容易歧视别人。
To be honest, there's still an Asian trend of us discriminating against
有
others.
时候我们讲话当中会歧视其他的种族，
In our language, in the words we say,
这样不对的。
this is not right.
那现在很惨，像我们华人也被歧视。我们在整个主流社会里面，最近疫情之下，亚洲人被很多的歧视。
It's unfortunate because, as we know from the news, that during the pandemic times, there is a lot of Asian targeted racism going on.
那你不想被人家歧视，所以你不可以歧视人。
If you don't want to be discriminated by others, we have to be the ones not discriminating others.
真正虔诚的不要歧视人。
For someone who is truly godly, we give no discrimination to other people.
读到这个撒玛利亚的人的比喻，让我想起很多年之前一个经历。
And reading the passage about the Good Samaritan, I remember a previous experience.
那个时候在南非，
At that time, I was in South
有一
Africa.
次跟弟兄姐妹开远途的车要去一个地方
One time, I was traveling long distance to a foreign place.
在荒郊野外，
I was traveling with brothers and sisters. We were in the wilderness.
突然间车子停下来，
All of a sudden, the car
我
stopped,
们以为车子坏掉，
and we thought maybe the car broke down.
后来检查一下发现原来没有汽油了。
And after a checkup, we realized we're out of gas.
那个开车的人很自责，哎呀，为什么算好没有算好？怎么会开到一半荒郊野外没有汽油？
The driver felt very guilty because he blamed himself that he did not calculate a bit more to see whether the fuel they had was enough.
但是车子已经停下来了，怎么办？
But right now, the car has already stopped. What do we do?
这南非很危险，治安很差。
Of course, it's quite dangerous because the security there wasn't great.
听了很多故事，哇！如果你在过高速公路停下来，很快的那些本地那些黑人会抢你。
And we have heard a lot of horror stories of someone being stalled on a highway and immediately being robbed by local groups.
African Black African
By local groups.
那这个因为他的这种传来传去都会这样想。
And so because we have heard these stories, we thought this would happen to us as
那我
well.
们再看看有没有人要救我们呢？
And so we looked around to see if anybody would help
我们一
us.
直举手啊，
We kept raising our hand,
希望那些人停下来帮我们。
hoping that passing cars would stop and help us.
车子一台一台经过，
And the cars went by one,
都没有停。
no one stopped.
我们以为这个开好车的人啊，那个能不能停一下就要帮我们？
When we saw people with nice cars driving by, we felt more
像
hopeful.
BMW 了啦，Benz 啦，好车一台一台开更快，
The really fancy brands, we had more hope, yet they drove past us even
这样
faster.
大半个小时都过了。
And about half an hour passed.
哇，我想说怎么办？心中一直默祷，到底谁来救我们？
And we thought, what do we do? And we kept praying in our hearts, hoping that someone would stop.
没有人救我们，我们在这边过夜，黑了，天黑了，
Because if nobody stopped, we would have to spend the night here in the darkness.
又怕有野兽，又怕有强盗
And we were afraid of both robbers and wild beasts.
当我们很绝望的时候，
When we were almost hopeless,
看到远远的有一台车，好像越来越慢。
we saw that from a distance there was a car who seemed to be slowing down.
他真的要停下来。
And it seems like they're really going to stop.
我们一看，哎呀，怎么这台车那么破？
And we saw, wow, this car is so beat up.
但是他停下来，
And the car stopped.
我们想这里面是谁？
And we thought, who is this?
一对黑人的夫妻
It was a local,
，black 了，直接讲 black 没关系，我们不是歧视，这是黑人的夫妻。
and it was a black couple.
哇，我们一看，一开始很紧张，
And we saw this, and we were kind of
哎
nervous.
呀，是不是有什么不好的事发生？
And did they have bad intentions?
结果他们就过来，很友善的跟我们说
And they came, and they were very friendly.
你们需要什么帮忙？
Do you need help?
我们说我们的车子没有，
We said that we're out of gas,
我们就不晓得怎么办。
and we don't know what to do.
这对夫妻他就说，那我们帮你去买油。
And this couple said, don't worry, we will go buy gas for you.
再往前面几十公里有个小镇，你在这边等着，我们去帮你去买汽油。
And they told us to wait. They said that a few kilometers down, there is a small town where you can get gas.
我们说多少钱？
And some people, and we asked how much.
他说没关系，我买完回来再跟你算。
And they said, don't worry, we'll tell you how much it was after we've returned.
他们就去了。
So they went.
我们想说会不会去了就不回来？
And we thought, will they even come back?
结果半个小时之后又回来，
But after half an hour, they came back.
还帮我们加好油。
And they added gas for us.
当然我们钱也给他。
And we gave them, we paid them back.
他们就要走了。
And they were about to leave.
我就问他说：“可不可以留个地址，由我们写封信啊，谢谢你。”
And we asked them, can we please have your address? We would love to thank you in the future.
后来我们就写信给他。
And later on, we did write a letter to them.
主耶稣派他们来帮助我们，
And we felt like Jesus sent them to help us.
就好像这个撒玛利亚比喻一样，
Just like the parable of the Good Samaritan.
开好车的啦，其他什么种族的啦都没有，就是当地的一对黑人的夫妻来帮助我们。
And all the nice cars and whatever other ethnic group, they did not stop for us, but it was this black couple who stopped for
所以
us.
哇，从这个之后，很多我们车上的人，很多人都改观了。
And since that time, it changed the perspectives of everybody in my vehicle.
真的，神爱每一个人，每一个种族的人，每一个颜色的人。
Truly, God loves every person, every ethnicity, every culture.
只要他心中是敬畏神的，他就像神。
As long as they have God in their hearts, as long as they're godly, they are like God.
虔不虔诚，有没有爱心，
Whether they're godly, whether they have love for God,
不是看你的皮肤颜色，
it's not to look at the color of your skin.
只要你有爱心，你就是真正的虔诚。
But if you have love, then you have godliness.
当然，这个很重要。
This is very
所以
important.
主耶稣接下来就说，
So Jesus said
我
next,
们看路加福音10章36、37节，
let's take a look at Luke chapter 10, verses 36 to 37.
你想这三个人中，哪一个是落在强盗手中的邻舍呢？
Verse 36, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell to the hands of robbers?
第37节，
Verse
那些
37,
文士法利赛人还不甘愿，他不想开口说是撒玛利亚人，
and you see that the experts of the law, they did not want to name the Samaritan.
因为他们问耶稣啊，那爱邻舍谁是我的邻舍？
because they had asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?"
好像自己很有道理，谁是我邻舍我都不知道。
As if they were in the right and they didn't know that who is my
主耶
neighbor.
稣要他们从他嘴中自己回答谁是你的邻舍，
So Jesus wanted them to say the answer themselves.
哪一个人？这3个人哪一个是他那个人的邻舍？
Out of these 3, who was the one who acted like a neighbor to the man injured?
这些法利赛人文士很坏，他们都不愿意回答撒玛利亚这几个字。
The Pharisees, the experts of the law, they were very witty. They did not want to say it directly that it was the
因为
Samaritan
他看不起撒玛利亚人，
because they looked down upon
他们
them.
只是说，哎呀，是那个怜悯他的。
So they simply replied, the one who had mercy on him.
但是主耶稣就不跟他们争论，
But Jesus did not continue to argue with them.
你就去照样行吧。
He simply told them, "Go and do likewise."
什么叫操练？
What does it mean to be
你
trained?
听到主耶稣的教导就去做啊，
You listen to Jesus's words and you go do.
不要以为自己听很多道理就很有爱心。
I don't think that just because you've listened to a lot of gospel that you automatically have
有
love.
时候我们老信徒的爱心啊，还比不上那个刚受洗；
Sometimes senior believers have less love than the new
有
believers.
时候老信徒还比不上布道者。
Sometimes not even compared to the true seekers.
不，当然不是每一个都这样，
Of course, I'm not saying that it's like that for everybody.
但是有时候我们信的久了，道理懂很多，但是很冷漠。
But sometimes we tend to grow cold in our love the longer we have
有
believed,
时候还跟人家斤斤计较，
or even nitpicking details with the other person.
哎呀，这主耶稣就很失望。
And Jesus would be disappointed.
所以我们要操练我们的爱心，
So we have to train up our love
违反你本来的这种自私，
to go against your natural born instincts,
违反你心中的对其他种族的歧视。
to go against the discrimination you have in your hearts,
不要歧视别人，别的种族。
to not be biased against people of other skin
因为是
colors.
真教会要传到四方，要传到不同的国家，
Because the gospel of the true church is to be spread to the ends of the
有
world,
不是我们种族的人进到我们教会，我们要更要去爱，更要去接纳，更要去包容。
especially when someone of another culture or ethnic group enters the church. We have to give them additional love, additional acceptance, and sense of
这
belonging.
个都是操练，
This is training.
没有操练他平常做不到。
If we don't have training, then we cannot do it.
所以我们今天要就是操练这个爱心。
So today we must train ourselves intentionally.
那如果没有操练的话怎么办？
What happens if we don't have training?
我们看马太福音25章，
Let's go to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25.
马太福音25章呢41节，
Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verse
41节，
41.
马太福音25章41节，
Matthew chapter
王又要向那左边的说：“你们这被咒诅的人，离开我，进入那位魔鬼和他的使者所预备的永火里去。”
verse 41. Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels."
这里主耶稣有讲了一个比喻，
Here, Jesus said a
说
parable
王当然要审判绵羊，把所有他的选民分开，成为绵羊跟山羊。
that in the future his people will be gathered and split as sheep and goats.
绵羊就是那个能够得救的，
The sheep are the ones who can be saved,
山羊就是那个不能得救的。
and the goats are the ones who cannot be saved.
那不能得救的人，为什么他不能得救呢？
So why are the goats unable to be saved?
你看他们有做很多坏事吗？
Did they do a lot of bad things?
其实他们没有做什么太坏的事，
Not necessarily.
他们只是没有做好事而已。
They simply did not do good deeds, actually.
他们没有做什么，
What did they not do?
王就说了：“我饿了也没有给我吃，我在监牢里没有来看我，我生病了也没有来看我。”
And the king said, "When I was hungry, you did not give me things to eat. When I was thirsty, you did not give me anything to drink.
我没衣服穿，你也没有给我衣服。
I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me."
那些人就很冤枉了，说你什么时候生病没来看你，什么时候饿没有给你吃，什么时候你没衣服穿没有给你衣服穿，
And the people accused were very confused, and they said, "When did this happen?"
这不可能的嘛！你是王啊，你需要的话我们全部给你啊，
It's impossible because you are the king. Whatever you need, we will give you.
对不对？今天如果主耶稣显现去你家里，不是什么全部东西会端出来，
Isn't this true that if Jesus appeared to you and came over to your house, won't you bring the best of the best in front of him?
主耶稣要你拿什么出来，你不会有第二句话。如果主耶稣亲自显现，
If he appeared to you in person and he asked for something from you, you will not hesitate for a second, but give him everything he
看
asks.
是梦也好，意象也好，你一定是我乖乖的全部，主耶稣要什么我绝对拿出来。
Or even in a dream or a vision, no part of you will hesitate to give him the
所以
best.
其实觉得不可能啊，怎么可能王你要这个东西我不给你？
So these people said that is impossible. How, whatever you want, we can give you.
但是王就说了，45节。
But in verse 45, the king said,
王要回答说：“我实在的告诉你们，这些事你们既不做在我这兄弟中这个最小的身上，这不在我，都在我的身上。”
he said, I tell you the truth, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me.
不是没有做在主耶稣身上，
It's not that they didn't do so for Jesus.
而是没有做在主耶稣的一个小子身上。
It's that they did not do for the least of them.
哇，那这个可能性就很大了。
So this possibility is much greater.
这个很有可能是你跟我，
It could be you and I.
我们可能对那些不起眼的人，可能没有太大的爱心。
Perhaps to the people on the margins, we did not show a lot of love.
我们对主耶稣可能很有爱心。
Maybe we have a lot of love
我
toward
想
Jesus.
主耶稣什么时候来，我接待。
And whenever Jesus will come, I will show great hospitality.
我是主耶稣差派来的长老啊、执事啊、传道啊，我抢而去接待。
Or those who were sent by Jesus, the deacons, the elders, the pastors, I will fight somebody to show hospitality.
但是对那个没有什么特别太显眼的、没有地位的、没有什么利用价值的、没有什么尊贵的，我们可能就看不见了。
However, perhaps for those that we deem without status in the church or without great faith or unworthy, then we don't take a second look.
所以这个就是要操练。
So this is training.
一看到那个不起眼的、不能报答你的，
Whenever we look at somebody unlovable or someone who cannot pay you back,
自己一个来信，
or maybe someone truth seeking on their own,
孤单的，
someone who's lonely,
全教里面经济状况最差的、最贫穷的，
maybe the poorest
或者生病的，
or the sick,
或者是呢失去自由的。
someone who has lost their freedom.
嘿，我要操练自己了，我要去关心，
And then I have to train myself, I have to practice caring for them.
因为这是主耶稣给我操练爱心的机会。
Because this is an opportunity for me to train my love that God has given me.
所以如果没有爱心呢，将来得救会有很大的问题。
So if you do not have love, then your salvation will be in
好
jeopardy.
那怎么操练？
So how do we train
有一点很
ourselves?
重要。
One thing is really
所谓的
important.
操练，你的爱心一定要在真理里面。
To train your love, it must be within the
我
truth.
们看约翰约翰2书1节跟2节。
Let's go to 2 John verses 1 and 2.
约翰2书1到2节。
2 John verses 1 and 2.
请你读。
Verse 1, the elder to the chosen lady and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not I only, but also all who know the truth.
第
Verse
2
2,
节。
because the truth which lives in us and will be with us forever.
这里告诉我们，真正的爱，操练爱心，要在真理里面操练。
Here it describes how true love must be conducted within the truth.
所以说，我们所爱，也是爱真理的人所爱的。
Because here is we love because those who love the truth also loves.
第2节，我说我们爱你们是为真理的缘故。
Because of the truth which lives in us and will be with
爱
us
要
forever.
在真理里面呢。
Love has to be within the truth.
爱不是你的情绪，我想爱谁，我怎么爱，不是你自己决定的，
Love is not just your emotion that you can choose whom to love and whom not to.
不是出于你自己的。
It doesn't come from just yourself.
我们刚刚讲过了，现在的人很多都是很看重自己
We describe how modern people look heavily upon themselves.
我想要，
I want,
我看见，我喜欢。
I see, I like.
所以现在人对爱情那种观念很扭曲。
So modern days, there's a very twisted perspective on love, on romance.
譬如说，已经有结婚的人，
Perhaps those people who have been married,
他可能不爱自己的配偶了，看到另外一个，我爱他，我跟他 在一起。
They might feel a lack of love toward their spouse. They see another person. They see what they like and they decide to
他说
love them.
我也爱他，我现在不爱我配偶，我说我去跟他结婚。
And they might say, but I don't love my spouse. I love this new person. I want to marry that person
或是
instead.
有人说我不爱异性，我爱同性。
Or maybe someone will say, I don't love the opposite gender. I love the same gender as myself.
这个社会是讲人权嘛，自由嘛。
And because our society puts a lot of emphasis on freedom and human rights,
你也是爱你自己喜欢的，
well, you love what you like.
但是我们要看真理，
But we have to look at the truth.
不是说我什么都是爱，
It's not that we can just throw love around.
违背真理的就不是真爱。
Because love that forbids, love that goes against truth is not true
所以
love.
我们要操练爱心，也要懂得真理。
So as we conduct love, we also have to abide by the
我
truth.
们所作所为的不能违背真理，不能超过真理。
In all that we do, all our conduct, it has to be compliant with the truth.
不是什么动不动的说哦没爱心，所以要有爱心，什么都要做。
And not to use love as an excuse to do anything we like.
要看圣经，
We have to look at the Bible.
这件事情神喜不喜欢的？
This matter, will God be pleased with it?
神爱的我也爱，
Whatever God loves, I will love.
神不爱的我们不可以去爱。
Whatever God does not love, we cannot love.
就算你很想要爱，
Even if you really want to love,
哎，违背真理我们不能这样子。
going against the truth, we cannot do that.
这个就是我们要操练，要在真理之下操练，
And this is an example of training within the truth.
不然我们很容易被骗了。
And otherwise, we'll be easily deceived.
别人一句说你没有爱，如果你不这样做，你没爱心。
One simple statement from others accusing us that if we don't do this, we are without
那
love.
为了要有爱心，你要去做，
Then for the sake of love, will you do it?
不能这样。
You cannot do so.
爱不能违背真理。
Because love cannot go against the truth.
比如说你家里有人拜偶像的，
For example, if you have a family member who worships idols,
或者是你有家人离世了，
or maybe you have a family member pass away,
他逼你，你要去拜一下吗？拿一个香啊，
and another family member will say, can you please go worship this deceased family member with some
你不
incense?
拜一下，怎么孝顺你父母？怎么爱你父母？
If you don't love if you don't worship your deceased parents, how can you love them?
你不叩一个头，怎么表明你的孝顺？
If you don't bow down before this deceased family member, how can you show your filial piety?
最近不是清明节快到吗？
So the annual holiday to visit cemeteries, Qingming, has arrived.
他是说你要爱你父母，你要这样做。
And the saying is that if you love your parents, you will go and worship
没有错，我们爱父母，
Of course, we love our
爱
parents.
祖先，
We love our ancestors.
但是拜他、烧香、叩头，这个都超过真理了，违背真理了。
But to kneel before them, to bow before them, to worship them, this is all against the,
这我们不可以
of the
做，
truth.
我们
So
不
we
可以。
cannot do that.
我们可以纪念，可以怀念，可以打扫墓地，可以放一束花放你坟墓面前。
We can hold memorials, we can grieve, we can remember, we can put flowers and clean the grave, and that's about
但是
it.
我们不祭拜、不烧香、不叩头，
We cannot bow, we cannot worship, and we cannot burn incense.
所以爱要有真理啊，
So love, it has to be within the boundaries of
操
truth.
练的好，用真理在真理里面的事情爱。
Good training is training within the truth.
但是很可惜，今天有一些人他只讲爱，但是不懂真理。
And it's unfortunate that even though people emphasize on love, but they don't care about the truth.
所以我们要在真理里面操练。
So make sure that we practice love within the boundaries of truth.
第二要怎么操练？
The second, how do we train?
你要尽自己的力量去爱。
We have to love with all we have.
好，我们看路加福音第9章36节。
Let's go to Luke chapter 9, verse 36.
路加对不起，使徒9章36节。
Let's go to Acts chapter 9, verse 36.
使徒9章36节到
Acts
39节。
Acts chapter 9, verses 36 to 39.
请读。
Verse 36, in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, which when translated is Dorcas, who was always doing good and helping the poor. Verse
37节。
37, about that time she became sick and died, and her body was washed and placed in an upstairs room.
38节。
Lydda was near Joppa, so when the disciples heard that Peter was in Lydda, they sent 2 men to him and urged him, "Please come at once."
39节。
39, Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them.
这里记载一个很有爱心的姐妹，
Here describes a very loving sister.
她的名字叫多加。
Her name was Dorcas.
这里没有记载多加很有钱，
It did not describe that Dorcas was wealthy.
相反的，她应该不有钱，因为她帮助别人是用自己的手去缝衣服送给寡妇们。
On the other hand, she was probably not rich at all because in order to help others, she had to use her own handiwork to make their
如果
clothing.
她很有钱啊，那就买衣服啊，全部愿意件都不用自己缝。
Because if she was wealthy, then she could have easily just purchased pieces of clothing for them.
不是什么生意人啊，不是卖布匹的那些有钱妇人。
She was not the wealthy who had businesses or owned a fabric business.
但是她看到一些那么多寡妇，以前的很多寡妇因为男人呢都死得很早，
But she saw these widows, and keep in mind that these widows, they often lost their spouse very young.
有时候啊，比较像样的衣服都没一件，里面的内衣也没有一件，外面的衣服买不起。
And often because they were poor, they could not afford good clothing, outer or inner layers.
那个多加知道他们需要，
And Dorcas saw their need,
那就帮他们缝衣服啊。
so she took time to sew clothing for them.
他有一支缝衣针，买布就自己花时间去。
She had a sewing needle. She purchased the fabric herself, and she took time to make
以
it
前都
for
没有
them.
车衣机哦，没有那么很大的车衣机啊，
And back then, there were no such thing as sewing machines.
衣服一针一针这样缝。
So you would literally have to hand sew every
你
stitch.
看哦，打一条毛线，打一条毛巾啊，那围巾呢，都要很多天。
And we know that even knitting one scarf will take a long time.
好像做一整件衣服，
And forget about a whole piece of robe.
但是他为很多寡妇做的衣服。
However, she was able to make clothing for many widows.
虽然人走了，多加离世了，
Even though she passed away,
大家拿下那些衣服，还真想念多加。
all these people were remembering her and holding the pieces of clothing that she had made for them.
所以这里告诉我们什么？
Here tells us one
什
thing.
么叫操练爱心？
What does it mean to train in love?
有人说，等我很有钱的时候，我才来周济别人，帮助别人。
Some people say, wait until I'm very rich and I will help all the helpless there are.
或者等我很有闲的时候，退休的时候，我才想想可以帮谁。
Or maybe when I have a lot of time, maybe after retirement, I will be charitable.
这个道理那么轻松的时候做得到，就不叫操练了。
And if you're able to do this while it's so easy for you, then it's not really training.
自己都很缺乏，但是你挤一些资源出来帮助别人，这个才是操练。
If you are in need, but you make a way to be charitable toward others, then that is training.
你都很忙了，但是你就挤一些时间出来帮助别人，这个才是操练。
Or if you're busy, but you make time to help others, then this is training.
你自己都很累了，但是你还是爬起来要去帮助、去访问、去做圣工。
You may be tired, but you still make time to visit those in need, to do holy work, then that's training.
我认识有一些弟兄姐妹，有一位姐妹，
I know this one sister.
哇，她自己也是腰酸背痛，
She has a sore back.
但是她还是去访问，
However, she often goes on visitation.
她克服自己的软弱，
She overcame her weakness.
她自己也是有年纪的，
And she is quite elderly herself.
但是为了要去访问，还要去医院跑那些比较容易感染的地方、比较危险的地方。
But she would often go to hospitals and other places where she may be exposed to illnesses herself.
她说为主耶稣做工啊，我们不怕。
And she said, I'm working for the Lord, I am not afraid.
生命在主耶稣手中。
And my life is in Jesus' hands.
真的，如果大家都像多加这样子，
So truly, if everybody was like Dorcas,
尽自己的力量，
to love with all she had,
还要甚至超过自己的力量，
and perhaps even exceeding what she had,
这样子的话，这个教会就很多爱在里面。
then this church will be filled to the brim with love.
但现在最怕的是什么？
What is the thing that people are afraid of the most?
现在最怕疫情持久之后，大家的爱心渐渐的冷淡。
It is that as the pandemic goes longer and longer, that the loving hearts of people will grow
我
cold.
们看马太福音24章12节。
Let's go to Matthew chapter 24, verse 12.
马太福音24章12节。
Matthew chapter 24, verse 12.
这里说，请读
Verse 12, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold.
这里虽然不是讲疫情，但是主耶稣已经说了，末世快到，人的爱心会越来越冷淡。
And here, even though it's not describing the pandemic per se, but Jesus described how at the end of age, with the increase of wickedness, love will grow cold.
现在不用不法的事了，现在疫情增加，疫情增多，人的爱心也越来越冷淡。
And we see how as the pandemic is worsening, the love of people are growing fainter.
你看到别人第一个想法就是他会不会有病毒？哎呦，不要那么靠近他。
And because now the first thought that may come into your mind as soon as you see another person is, are they infected?
弟兄姐妹以前很亲的，每个礼拜见面。
Before, brothers and sisters were very intimate. We see each other every week.
现在有些1年都没见面了，就很冷，很冷。
But it's been almost a year since we've last seen each other, so it's grown a bit cold.
一开始还打个电话问候，后来电话都没打了。
And in the beginning, maybe we would call to check up on each other, but now even phone calls don't exist.
或者是别人打给你，你都不想接了，觉得很麻烦，讲电话很麻烦。
Or perhaps someone will call you, but you don't want to pick up because you think it's too much hassle.
哎，有什么活动？哎呀，不想理了，不关我事。
Are there any activities? And you say, I don't feel like attending.
慢慢冷掉。
And because the cold is, it grows cold gradually.
现在都还没有大逼迫来了，如果我们不提醒自己、不反省之后，这个爱心慢慢也冷掉。
Right now, we don't have a great persecution, so we have to remind ourselves not to get our love grow cold.
但是我们不可以让这样子发生，
But we cannot let this happen.
因为如果我们缺乏了爱，
Because if we are lacking in love,
这不是真正的虔诚。
then it's not true godliness.
教会缺乏爱，
When a church is lacking in love,
就会变得冷漠。
then it becomes
下一页
cold.
就好像一个暖气没有了，那里房子不是很难受吗？让你很难待着，很难受啊。
Just like a house without heater, it grows freezing and it's hard to stay there.
缺乏了爱，信仰就变得没有味道。
And faith without love, the faith will lose its taste.
你听道理都是自己听自己的，没有想到别人有什么用？
You're listening to the gospel for yourself, and without thinking of other people, what use does it have?
因为我们信仰不是只有你跟神的关系，
Because your faith is not just you and God.
还有跟身边的弟兄姐妹的关系。
There's also your relationship with brothers and sisters.
还有缺乏爱，福音的变得很难传。
And without love, it is hard to evangelize.
那谁喜欢去一个没有爱的团体？
Who will want to go to a group where there's no love?
所以我们的操练爱心非常重要，
So to train up your love is very important.
不可以让这个疫情让我们疏远，让我们冷淡对教会的事情对教会的那些团契没有兴趣。
We cannot allow the pandemic to get in the way of our showing love to each other, to joining fellowship, and to remain connected.
很奇怪以前打电话要钱，大家还会打电话。
It's very funny because in the past it will cost you to make every phone call.
我记得中学的时候，跟同学很喜欢讲电话，煲电话粥广东话叫煲电话粥哇，一讲可以跟同学讲1-2个钟
I remember in middle school, I loved to talk on the phone with my friends, and I would talk for hours.
被父母看见还被骂一顿。
And when my parents saw this, they will rebuke me
我可以讲很久的电话。
because I can stay on the phone for so long.
还有呢，移民之后跟香港的朋友联络，还要讲长途电话，还要花钱，还是会讲。
And I remember after I immigrated, I would call home to speak to friends in Hong Kong. It would cost me money, but I still would call them.
以前的手机每1分钟算钱，时间都很宝贵的，还是要讲话。
In the past, when you used your cell phone, every minute would cost you something, and time was precious, yet you still made those
很
calls.
奇怪现在手机的也是月费也是固定的，大部分是 unlimited call。
It's very funny because these days many cell phone plans offer a set rate with unlimited
但是
time.
大家对讲话没兴趣。
But people don't really have a lot of interest in talking.
好了，长途电话不用钱现在网络的可以讲。哎呀，觉得好烦那最好不要打给我，一个字打一打就好了，不要烦我。
And even long distance calls are free on certain apps, but some people find it troublesome. They don't want to talk anymore. They say simply message
一
me.
开始那个 video call 出来，大家很兴奋的可以看到，现在不想看，你不要我打开相机。
And when video calling, the feature first came out, people were very excited to see each other's faces, but now people often turn the
奇
camera
怪
off.
以前又要钱，又有时差，又麻烦，讲话又有回音，那个电话卡都有回音的，对不对？ 打电话卡都回应，现在要快，要不用钱，又没回应，大家都说不用啦，打2个字就好了，不用那么啰嗦了。
I find it very strange because back then not only was calling expensive, there was glitches. You heard your own voice resonating back, and there was time difference, but people were still enthusiastic to call. Now it's cheap, it's convenient, the technology is good, but people simply want to text.
Video conference 都有很多很贵的公司才买得起的。
Back then, video conference was only afforded by the most prestigious
现
companies.
在免费 Zoom 啊，大家都不用 download 那个 app 都不用了，你就按那个 link 上去就可以看到大家。使了，不用了。
But now features like Zoom is free and you don't even have to download it. You simply click on an app, yet people say, no, thank you. I don't want to
没事不要找我。
Don't bother me.
有事也不要找我。
Don't bother me even if you need me.
有时候好像冷到这个样子。
Sometimes we are cold to this point.
魔鬼最高兴，你们这些基督徒冷啊，不要管对方。
But the person celebrating is the devil because he sees that Christians are growing cold, you're growing distant from each other. That's great.
大逼迫都不用来，你们就散掉了。
I don't even need to bring great persecution. You are scattering yourselves.
谁没去教会，谁犯罪，谁死掉都不知道。
Who is no longer going to church, who is being sick, who is struggling, who passed away, nobody
我们不要
knows.
中魔鬼诡计啊！
So do not fall into the trap of the devil.
虽然我们暂时不能回到教堂聚会，
Even though temporarily we cannot return to the chapel for service.
但是有什么团契，有什么电话，有什么互相联络，还是要保持住。
But whatever phone calls, whatever connections or fellowships, let's continue to maintain
我们
those.
知道谁需要代祷，我们还是要花时间替他祷告。
We still have to know who has prayer requests and to continue to pray for each other.
我们最后看启示录第2章，
Lastly, let's go to Revelations chapter 2.
启示录第2章第4节，
Revelation chapter 2, verse 4.
2章第4节。
Chapter 2, verse 4.
然而有一件事我要责备你，就是你把你起初的爱心离弃了。
Verse 4, yet I hold this against you. You have forsaken your first love.
以弗所教会啊，其实是信仰上还是蛮坚固的，
Ephesians church, they were a pretty solid church in terms of faith.
道理也很纯。
And they kept a pure doctrine.
但是圣灵责备他，
However, the Holy Spirit rebuked them.
责备他什么？
What did it rebuke them
你跟
of?
当初不一样，
You are different from before.
你没有当初所有的爱。
You no longer has the love that you had in the beginning.
你现在也是爱神，但是你现在对人没有什么感受了，
You still love God, yet you don't have a lot of feeling toward man anymore.
很有可能是这样。
And perhaps it's like this.
所以圣灵责备他，
So the Holy Spirit rebuked them.
你要回想你哪里堕落了，
You have to reflect on where you have
你
fallen
什
off.
么时候开始变得那么冷呢？
When did you start growing
你
cold?
要想想啊，有一个点让你开始
You have to think of where that turning point was.
好了，然后呢，要行起初所行的。
And you have to remember your first love.
你一开始怎么做的，你现在继续做。
How did you used to do things? Do it again.
你以前怎么对人，你现在怎么对人，
How did you treat people before? Do it again.
你不要灰心，
Do not give up.
你继续做。
Continue on.
我们要操练我们的爱心，
I will train you in love.
就是你很不想要去做，
Even though you don't want to do it,
但是你要逼自己去做。
but you have to force yourself to.
就算别人不这样去做，
Even if others don't do the same,
你还是要去做。
you have to do it.
这个撒玛利亚人，
Just like the Samaritan.
他看到那个人躺在地上的时候，
When he saw the person beaten on the ground,
他过去帮忙。
he went over to help.
他肯定不是第一次去帮助别人，
It's definitely not the first time that he's helped somebody.
如果他平常没有这种习惯，
Because if he doesn't have the habit of helping others,
他那个时候也不会这样做。
then at that situation, he probably wouldn't have reached out.
平常之后操练，
We daily practice.
这是我们要做的。
This is something that we must do.
愿主耶稣帮助我们。
May the Lord help all of us.
来唱诗343首。
Let's sing hymn number 343.